Hello students, in this video we are going to do the reading and explanation of your fifth story, that is A Face in the Dark by Ruskin Bond. So as we know, Ruskin Bond is a writer from the British descent, but he has been all his life been in India, and especially in our places like Shimla and Dehradun, Missouri especially. So he has written a lot of stories which are related to these areas which we know personally. So we can say over here in this story also, he has given a particular description of a school which is in Shimla, and although the name is not given as clearly as such, but it is given as a story which was of that particular story where Mr. Oliver, an Anglo-Indian teacher, he was working and he was a bachelor and he did not believe in supernatural, or you can say paranormal activities. And then when he came across such event, what and how things turned out around for him and what he did, all that is given over here. You can say this basically is not a story in itself, it is like an excerpt which has been taken from a fuller story. Like whenever you are all your friends sitting in front of a bonfire or in a family gathering and each one telling their own particular experiences or the small pieces of information they have heard about the paranormal activities. Similarly, we can say Ruskin Bond over here has tried to share one particular excerpt of his his knowledge that he has shared over here, which belongs to a paranormal genre. So here we see what happens in this story to Mr. Oliver, an Anglo-Indian teacher. So let's begin with the reading. It is A Face in the Dark by Ruskin Bond, and the story says, Mr. Oliver, an Anglo-Indian teacher, was returning to his school late one night on the outskirts of the hill station of Simla. The original name is Simla. We might call it as Shimla, but the original name is Simla. So he was an Anglo-Indian teacher who was working in a school in Simla, which was in the outskirts. Earlier in those days, schools and especially residential schools, as we know, this one also was a residential school. So schools at that time were not supposed to be somewhere in the city. They were supposed to be away from the city, in total you can say a solitary environment in solitude, so that children get proper attention focus towards their studies and not get distracted by all the hustle bustle of the city. So here we see this school was also around at the outskirts of Shimla, and maybe you can say 2-3 miles away from the main city. From before Kipling's time, the school had been run on the English public school lines. Kipling is Rudyard Kipling's. He came to India and he wrote about the Jungle Book and all that particular description of India. So when he did all that work, this school even before that was running on the lines of the school English medium schools, or the schools on the guidelines of the British schools. And the boys, most of them from wealthy Indian families, wore blazers, caps and ties. So the children, those who used to come to this school, were mainly from the rich families, and even their attire was totally Western, or you can say formal, Western formal. The blazers, the caps and ties. Life magazine, in a feature on India, had once called it the Eton of the East. Mr. Oliver had been teaching in the school for several years. So Life magazine was one of the prestigious magazines at that time, and it was in this magazine that when it wrote about the it wrote its Indian edition, it wrote about this particular school. And while talking about this school, the magazine described it as the Eton of East. Eton basically was an institute over there in Britain, in the West, and it was one of the prestigious schools. And this one was compared to that. Like today if we say that Indian universities like Nalanda and Takshila were like the Oxford and Cambridge of that time, so we are comparing them to the Western best universities. So in the similar way, he is saying that it was mentioned in the magazine, Life magazine, that it was the Eton of the East, and Mr. Oliver had been working in the school for several years. Now the main story starts. The Simla Bazaar was, with its cinemas and restaurants, was about 3 miles from the school, and Mr. Oliver, a bachelor, usually strolled into the town in the evening, returning after dark, when he would take a short cut through the pine forest. So Mr. Oliver, who was working over there, he used to work in the school daytime obviously, and in the evenings, as he was a bachelor, he had no family and kids to take care or to do all the family chores. So he basically went out in the evenings to Simla market, going to the cinemas, to the restaurants, having food, having leisure time. And then in the evening, especially at the dark, you can say during the dark or the night time, then he would return back to school. And since we know he was not an imaginative man, he was not imagining things that there are ghosts and things coming up, so he was not scared of all that. He would go to the school through the shortcut, which was through the pine forest. Most of the people would not take that particular thing out of fear of wild animals and the ghosts, but he would not do that. He would always take it the shortcut through the pine forest. When there was a strong wind, the pine trees made sad, eerie sounds and kept most people to the main road. But Mr. Oliver was not a nervous or imaginative man. Nervous means scared or easily get scared or feared. And imaginative means someone who can imagine things that, oh, there might be some ghost, there might be some apparition or something. Whether you see it or not, but you are always imagining things, that somebody is watching you, somebody is following you. So most of the people, because as they took the forest shortcut, these sounds of the winds, and especially in the pine forest, would make a lot of sounds, and that would make them feel that something really disturbing, really scaring is there. But Mr. Oliver had no such imaginations. He was not into all these paranormal thinkings. He carried a torch, and its gleam, the batteries were running down, moved fitfully down the narrow forest path. So he had always had his torch with him for the forest route, but today its gleam was flickering. Why? Because the batteries had run down, and so he was fitfully moving down, means he was going through the slopes, not knowing his proper steppings. He might be getting some particular places misstepped. So he was walking that ways, and it was a slope, so he was not walking very comfortably, but still he was able to walk, even with the flickering of the torchlight. When its flickering light fell in the figure of a boy who was sitting alone on a rock, Mr. Oliver stopped. Boys were not supposed to be out after dark. So at that time, in the evening time, when it was all dark, suddenly his torch gleam or light fell on a figure which he could very easily make out that it's a boy sitting on a rock. And obviously the boy was crying. So the first instant that Mr. Oliver had was of a teacher, and a dutiful teacher, and this dutiful teacher instantly felt that why is this boy out, because probably we know that he was having a cap of the school, so probably he might be having the entire uniform of the school, and probably even if not so, then he might have appeared to be a school fellow. So he must have thought that this is a boy who has been a miscreant and has run from the hostel, from the school. And so he instantly thought that boys are not supposed to be out during the night or during the dark. Why is he out over here? And he must have got somewhere, lost his way towards the school. So that is why he, out of concern, and as well as a strict teacher, a disciplinarian, he went over there to ask the child that why he was there out. "What are you doing out here, boy?" asked Mr. Oliver sharply, moving closer so that he could recognize the miscreant. But even as he approached the boy, Mr. Oliver sensed that something was wrong. So when he went closer to that boy, he asked him, "Why are you here? What is it? What are you doing here?" He was inquiring something. He wanted to know some information from that boy, that what is he doing over here. But even when he went closer to the boy, he felt that something is not right. There is something wrong. There is something misfitting, and he didn't know that, but he felt that somewhere that there is something wrong, or everything entirely wrong about this whole situation. The boy appeared to be crying. His head hung down. He held his face in his hands, and his body shook convulsively. It was a strange, soundless weeping, and Mr. Oliver felt distinctly easy. So here you can understand the scenario. The boy is sitting on the rock. He is having his head down on his knees, on his thighs probably, and his hands on his face like a face palm, and he is covering his face with the hands, and his face is down on his thighs, and there he is. It seems that he's crying badly. But even though when he's crying badly and shaking convulsively, very badly shaking, still there is no particular sound of sobbing. It seems to be a very inappropriate crying, which is crying hardly, but crying hard, but no particular sound. So that was something which made Mr. Oliver quite uneasy, but still he was not able to make out what the real picture is or what the real scene story is going to be now. But he still felt very uneasy about this entire thing, that the boy is sitting all alone in the forest and crying, and that too without any sound. Well, so suddenly he turned out from a strict disciplinarian to a particular concerned teacher. As an elder, he tried asking the boy that what has happened, why are you crying? You can tell your problem, whatever it is. Out of concern, he now turned to be little more, you can say, very docile manner. He asked him, "Well, what's the matter?" he asked, his anger giving way to concern. "What are you crying for?" The boy would not answer or look up. His body continued to be racked with silent sobbing. "Come on, boy, you shouldn't be out here at this hour. Tell me the trouble. Look up." The boy looked up. He took his hands from his face and looked up at his teacher. The light from Mr. Oliver's torch fell on the boy's face, if you could call it a face. So here Mr. Oliver, out of concern, is asking the boy that please tell me what is it that is bothering you, why are you crying, you can tell me why are you crying, what are you crying for. So at that time, after a lot of insisting of Mr. Oliver, finally the boy was not ready to show his face, and he was just shaking and crying in a way without any sound. So then at last he took away his hands from his face, and then he looked up at Mr. Oliver. So now Mr. Oliver's torch light fell on the face of this young child, and the writer says it fell on his face, if or you could call it a face. So that means there was some deformity, something different with was there with the face. What was that? It had no eyes, ears, nose or mouth. It was just a round, smooth head with a school cap on top of it. And that's where the story should end. But for Mr. Oliver, it did not end here. The strange part was that when the boy looked up at Mr. Oliver, at that time Mr. Oliver noticed that the boy had no face. It was just a smooth round head, round piece of skin, ball covered with skin, without any eyes, nose, mouth, any facial features, nothing there, just a cap on top, the school cap on top probably. And so this boy looked like a boy, but he was not a boy in reality. It was just an apparition, something you can say paranormal, and he had no particular facial features. Now after that, the story should end over here that Mr. Oliver witnessed something paranormal, something not natural and normal. But the story did not end over here. It had something more for Mr. Oliver. The torch fell from his trembling hand. He turned and scrambled down the path, running blindly through the trees and calling for help. He was still running towards the school building when he saw a lantern swinging in the middle of the path. Mr. Oliver stumbled up to the watchman. So here he was having his torch, and when he saw this apparition, he was so scared. He was like trembling and shivering, and the torch fell from his hands, and out of, you can say, mad scare, he was scared to death. He was just running madly down the slope, running anywhere he can step his foot, and as that way he kept on running, shouting for help. And then as he came down the slope, finally he could see a particular lantern right in the center of the forest. And there, as he went over there closer to that lamp, he saw it was the watchman. So finally he was relieved, and he came running to the watchman, and then, gasping for breath, "What is it, Sahib?" asked the watchman. "Has there been an incident? Why are you running?" So the watchman, as he reached the watchman, he was gasping, he was out of breath, he was panting. And at that time, the watchman came to him and closer to him and asked, "What is it, sir? What is it, Sahib? Why are you scared? Or why are you running? Is there some accident that has taken place for which you are so bothered and you are running like that in so much of haste?" So at that time, Mr. Oliver answered, "I saw something horrible, a boy weeping in the forest, and he had no face." So he told him he had no face, and the apparition he had seen was horrifying. It was it was in the form of a child crying, but at the same time he had no particular features. "No face, Sahib? No eyes, nose, mouth, nothing." So the watchman inquired, "What do you mean, sir? He doesn't have any facial features?" So he said he did not have any eyes, mouth, nose, nothing. So at that time, the watchman said, "Do you mean it was like this, Sahib?" asked the watchman, and raised the lamp to his own face. The watchman had no eyes, no ears, no features at all, not even an eyebrow. And that's when the wind blew the lamp out. So at that time, the watchman told Mr. Oliver that, "What do you mean that he had no facial features, sir? Was the face like this?" And then he lifted his own lamp towards his own face, and in that dark, eerie sound environment, one could see the watchman. Mr. Oliver could see that watchman too had nothing on his face, no facial features, not even an eyebrow, no eyes, mouth, nose, nothing. It was the same apparition which was there in the form of a small boy and now in the form of a watchman standing right in front of him in that particular lantern light, showing its identity, you can say, not the face but obviously the identity. And at that time, when Mr. Oliver was taken aback by this particular apparition, at that time the wind blew the lamp out. And with this, the story comes to an end. But here, Mr. Ruskin Bond, you can say, has written it very nicely, and he has given the entire excerpt as per his wish. But he has left the ending to our own discretion, what we might think must have happened to the teacher, to Mr. Oliver, whether he died then and there, whether he fainted and he passed out and he woke up the next morning in the forest, or whether he passed out and then when he opened his eyes he was in the school, or whether he started running from there also, whether the apparition killed him, he also turned into a ghost. All those things, we might have various different fancies and we might have different takes on this particular ending or story. So he has left it on our discretion. What probably might have happened to the teacher, we don't know, because there is nothing given over there about it in the story. So that is why it is the best way of playing with somebody's, you can say, interest in the story, because you feel that you are left with an ending where you can have different ways of putting a story after this and after story. So here, this is one of the stories written by Ruskin Bond, where he has shown his interest in the paranormal activities, how much he appreciated and liked it, and in this particular masterpiece he has very nicely given a particular excerpt in a very simple but yet very, you can say, effective way, which tells the horror of the story, the suspense of the story, and obviously the paranormal supernatural element of the story of about this apparition and how it was following Mr. Oliver throughout the forest. Maybe it might be following this particular man for various days, and that particular day was the day when it really finally appeared in front of the teacher. So here we don't have any particular proofs to prove this particular point, yet the story says it like that. So with this, we come to the end of this story. In the next video, we will be taking up the next story, that is your chapter 4, I guess, fourth story, which is Hearts and Hands, and that is written by O. Henry in the similar way, a short story, yet very effective, very interestingly written. And that too ends with a very abrupt ending, as we are doing the revision, so you know what the story is, yet we'll do it so that you get a firm control of the concepts and understanding. But for that, while we are doing these explanations and revision, reading and explanations, please you also go through this chapter after looking at the video. You can at the same time look into your books also while I'm reading and explaining it to you. It will be more of a classroom teaching for you and understanding the same thing even better. So with this, we come to the end of the chapter, end of this video, and next video we'll see soon, where we'll come soon with the next story. So we'll end up this video over here.